There we go.
Welcome to the worldwide launch of From Chaos to Clarity, the new global study from Clare and Saatchi, looking at the ways in which leaders can chart a path through the chaos to deliver growth. Featuring perspectives from more than 700 CEOs and CMOs of large organisations in the United States, the UK, Germany, Singapore and China, and from a variety of agency leaders in our own network, our aim is to understand how business leaders manage chaos, find growth, and transform for the future. Today we'll be picking out 4 ways in which chaos is undermining growth and discussing how to address them with 3 outstanding global CMOs. We'll be starting shortly, so do enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to the worldwide launch of From Chaos to Clarity, our new white paper that looks at the future of the marketing function. My name is Geraint Jones, and I'm Clare's Global Marketing Director, and it's great to see some old friends and new joining us for today's conversation. I can already see people from Microsoft, Bacardi, RB, Intuit, Heineken, ESPN, Goldman Sachs, SC Johnson. There's a huge list of you, so thank you so much for joining us. We're also streaming this session live on LinkedIn, so a warm welcome to all of our audience there as well. We're also, as an attendee, your camera and your microphone are automatically off. So you'll not be able to turn them on automatically, and you can relax. This session has been recorded and shared on our YouTube channel at Clare MNC Saatchi and our website clearstrategy.com tomorrow morning. And finally, watch out for an email from the Clare team on Monday with your copy of the white paper. For more content and events, and to watch recordings of this and other conversations, please visit clearstrategy.com/events and link in the comments later, and also follow us at Clare MC Saatchi on LinkedIn for more updates. Should you wish to ask a question, I don't really think we'll have a lot of time for them, but should you try to ask a question during the show, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and start your question with the name of the panelist you'd like to answer. For example, type Muriel and then ask your question. Right, we're now going to get on with the show. Firstly, on the agenda today, we're going to talk a bit about the methodology. We're going to talk about how chaos undermines growth, and then we're going to talk a bit about harnessing the chaos for growth. So first things first, let's talk about the methodology. So I'm going to start by talking you through what we've done and why. So as some of you will know, Clare is the growth consulting arm of the MNC Saatchi Group, and we found ourselves in the thick of helping brands to manage the chaos in the last 12 months. From future scenario planning to rapid agile innovation, a category strategy to portfolio management, brand repositioning to proposition development, we've been asked to help brands in a number of sectors to navigate a path through the choppy waters of marketing strategy. And in amongst all of that, we've seen real change in how businesses are engaging with their marketing departments and CMOs in the quest for growth. For a few years, I think it's been fashionable to beat up on the role of the CMO in the media, but our experience of this year has led us to believe that marketers and marketing and its leaders are having something of a renaissance. So we invested in the middle of last year in a global study of nearly 700 CEOs, CMOs and senior marketers in 5 markets to size and understand that shift and to help to pinpoint how marketers can go on to cement a position of real strategic leadership in their organizations in the coming years. So a little bit about the methodology before I introduce our panel. So as I say, we looked at 700 CEOs, CMOs and senior marketers. We went out to the US, the UK, China, Germany and Singapore, and we did that in September last year. And I'm now going to spend a little bit of time introducing our fantastic panel. So I'm just going to ask each of them to sort of raise a hand and wave when I do the introduction. So I'm going to start with Pete Markey. Pete Markey is the current, but soon to be former Chief Marketing Officer of TSB Bank, because I think he's joining Boots in a CMO role at the beginning of February. Pete is currently responsible for brand marketing, analytics, customer communications and digital sales at TSB. And he's been at all sorts of different businesses from Aviva, the Post Office, RSA, More Than, and started his early career in Wantel, the AA and British Gas. As well as running marketing, Pete also is the executive sponsor for the TSB LGBT Plus network, and he's been awarded 4 prestigious Marketer of the Year awards. So hopefully will be a very good commentator on some of the topics we'll discuss today. We're also joined by one of his old colleagues, which we found out today, Muriel Lotto, who is the Global Brand and Marketing Director from Western Union. Muriel has spent over 25 years in international marketing in both the client and agency side in France, the UK, Switzerland, and now the US. In companies such as Nestle, Unilever, Royal and Sun Alliance, Bupa, and now Western Union, where she heads up the global brand and marketing strategy function. She's responsible for transformative marketing strategies, focusing on audience definition, targeting customer journeys, messaging, and media mix optimization, as well as creative and advertising excellence. So again, that touches on so many of the topics that the study uncovers. And finally, we're joined by Nick Street. Nick is Vice President of Global Integrated Marketing at Vans, and is responsible for leading global marketing initiatives across product, action sports, brand platforms, and communications. He began his career with Vans in 2006, has been there quite some time, and has worked in 3 regional offices around the world, making Nick a true global representative of the Vans brand. He's led some really significant work in building dynamic teams of strong individuals and agencies, and we'll come on to that kind of collaboration point in a short while. And he's been working in EMEA and APAC and establishing digital leadership for the brand, particularly around effective use of social media. So a fantastic panel, I'm sure you'll agree. And we're going to go on to talk about some of the content that we have in the report together. And what I'm going to do is ask the panel to respond to each of the key points that we found in the study. So it should be quite a nice back and forth discussion. So now I'm going to hand over to Rhonda, and Rhonda's going to talk us through how chaos undermines growth. So I'm just going to reshare the presentation, and we will go from there.
Thanks, Geraint. All right, well, thank you again to all of our panelists for joining us, as well as all of you who are in the audience. We have some really exciting findings to share with you all today. And are interested to hear the conversation from our panelists. And Geraint, if we're just not in full screen, thank you. All right, so how chaos undermines growth. So as Geraint noted, we conducted this study earlier in the fall of this past year, and we really wanted to understand this idea of how do you move from the chaotic, complex environment we live in today to really that clarity that will afford us growth. And what we found within the study are 4 very strong and key points of why a lot of that chaos is happening. Some of it is driven by external factors, of course, and some of it is driven by internal factors. So what we'll do now is talk about the 4 major insights that we uncovered within the study. I would encourage you to read the full white paper, which will talk a lot more about the data specifically and how we arrived at these 4 insights. With our great panel that we have today, though, we'd love to debate and discuss and get a bit of live perspective on these points. So just to run through them quickly, and then we will go to the data that supports each of these 4. The first one is about strategy getting stuck in the boardroom. So this is quite an interesting finding that we're going to share the data on specifically here in a second. But the idea that a lot of times there's a lot of clarity at the top of the organization, but as that starts to disseminate down and the people who are responsible for the day-to-day execution of that strategy have far less clarity than what might be at the top of the organization. The second piece is misalignment between goals and action plan. We like to talk about this as a bit of the game of telephone, where we might agree on a goal at the top, but as it starts to move down the chain, the action plan is not quite aligned to that specific strategic goal. The third piece is, and I think we can all relate to this, and we certainly saw as the Q&As came in from the registrations, is how do you balance the short term and the long term? We're in a world today where it's very unclear what the future holds. So how do we make sure that we're not focusing too much on that short term at the expense of the long term? Very excited to hear from our panelists. They have some great insight into this. And then the final piece, and perhaps one of the most interesting findings, is how marketing is stretched. We all know that marketing is stretched at this time, but exactly what does that look like, both from a capability and capacity standpoint? So those will be the major 4 points that we go through. After we cover that discussion, we will then go into what is the tools, what are the answers, and what are some solutions that you can use to actually navigate this chaos. So with that, we'll get on to the first point and looking forward to hearing from our panelists. So as promised, some of the data from our report, again, read the white paper and you'll see a lot more data around this topic, but strategy is getting stuck in the boardroom. So of those 700 CEOs, CMOs, VPs, and directors of marketing that we talk to globally, we asked a question around how clearly defined is your strategy internally? And you can clearly see the gap here. So 80% of our C-suite, including CEOs and CMOs, said that our strategy is very well defined. 80% agree. However, when you move down to that top box score with our VPs and directors, that drops to 59%. And as you move down the chain, it disintegrates even further. So very much speaking to that, again, top down versus making sure it gets all the way through to everyone who's responsible for execution. So with that, Geraint, serve up some good questions for this panel.
So I'm going to come to you first, Pete, if that's okay. I mean, if we look back at what that says, the sort of the challenge there is very clear. You know, you're caught between the idea of having a very clear strategy amongst the C-suite, but then as soon as you drop down a level, the sort of the fidelity, I guess, kind of dissipates. Is that something you faced in your role at TSB? Is it something? I mean, you've just really relaunched a strategy, I think. So is that something you faced yourself? I think you might be on mute.
That's the age-old problem, isn't it? I'll tell you what, a number of times I've done that in the last couple of months. I'm here. So yes, it's a point I really identify with. And actually, we, for the last 2 years, gone out of our way as a marketing leadership team to almost over-communicate the strategy to all of the marketing team. And part of the thing I think we often forget as marketers is we spend so much time and energy on customers, quite rightly, and attracting new customers in, but don't spend enough time using the tools of our own trade to communicate to our own colleagues to get them engaged and involved in the strategy. And so my learnings are twofold. First of all is actually it needs to be communicated. So you need to share that with your team. But secondly, you need to tailor it in a way that is hugely relevant, because often, you know, strategies, you know, they don't all touch the marketing team, for example. They don't touch every colleague. So actually what we've done is produce a marketing strategy document as a companion to the main strategy document in a kind of bite-sized, no more than sort of 20 slides type document, but is very easy to apply to each of the teams. That says, here's your role in delivering this strategy. Here's what your team does and your contribution to this strategy. So each person, as they start the year, has got a real handle on, right, well, how does my team help make this thing happen? What's my role that fits into delivering and making this strategy a success? And also giving them a chance to ask questions, challenge, and bring their own ideas to help bring the strategy to life. So actually we did it just over a week ago now, unveiled and talked through the 2021 marketing strategy for TSB, direct link to the business strategy with a whole marketing team. And it was led by myself and all of my lead team, bringing that to life with a Q&A as well. And I clearly usually would have done that face-to-face. We did it online. But for me, the learning is absolutely those two things. Is firstly, you just got to communicate it and share it. Often it gets stuck, isn't shared. And secondly, you have to make it relevant. You have to, you know, particularly at VP director level, people need to know what role they can personally play and contribute towards it. And also importantly, people's goals then should align behind it as well. If the VPs and directors are, you know, have got targets for the year, those should link to the strategy. They should be able to say, if I've achieved these goals, I've also delivered my part of the strategy. And often there's a disconnect there. So no, we've gone out of our way to address those points and also to over communicate the strategy for that reason as well.
Yeah, I think it's a hugely important point. I think the point you make about attaching it to people's objectives and actually making it tangible for them is crucial, because a lot of the time we come across businesses who don't invest the time in doing that and actually aligning it with people's development plans, and as a result, it feels very abstract for people at different points in the organization, whether they're in marketing or elsewhere. And you know, making it's a very old hackneyed phrase, but you know, making sure that your brand strategy is understood by the most recent hire in the business or the lowest paid employee is absolutely true here. Muriel, I'm going to come to you on this as well. How does this work at Western Union? You've got quite a different structure and your CEO is quite engaged with this idea. So can you just talk to us a little bit about how Western Union works around this sort of challenge?
So I totally agree with everything that Pete just said. Communicate, communicate, and communicate again. I don't think you can over-communicate the strategy. I think every town hall, every leadership meeting should start with, what's the strategy, what's the execution, how are we progressing on that? So totally agree with that. Also totally agree with the point of aligning people's goals right up to the strategy. So at Western Union, the way we do that is we use a tool called the strategy Placemat, and it's effectively the company strategy on a page, and then the format itself gets cascaded down to every team in the organization, and everybody's goals ladder back up to effectively the overall company strategy. So whether you work in marketing, whether you work in customer care, in finance, in HR, any function in the organization, there needs to be a red thread that goes from your individual goals to your team goals to the company strategy. And we are very, very disciplined about that. We do this with purpose, we do this with intent, we do this with clarity, and we publish everybody's placemats on our intranet. So it's visible at any point in time. You can see anybody's goals on the intranet for anybody in the organization. So that level of transparency and visibility means we get a very, very high level of tight connections between all the teams and engagement because it's very visible. We publish it.
It means the strategy at the start has to be very good, doesn't it? It has to be absolutely clear, because if you're doing that, if you've got that level of radical transparency through the business, then if the strategy is not as sharp as it should be, then it will very rapidly become obvious.
Absolutely.
Oh, there you go. Rhonda, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Geraint. It's great to hear that communication, that'll be one of the key points that we have in the action items later on. So the second finding and what we talked about is quite interesting, and you'll see the data split out here between CEOs and CMOs. And so we asked them, what are your top 3 marketing priorities? And so you can imagine this question for CEOs was asked is, what are the top 3 priorities for your marketing teams, in your opinion? And then the CMOs, what are the top 3 priorities that you have as the responsible party of the organization? And what we found here is quite interesting. And there's a load of data in the report that you can look through in more detail. But the top thing, the top priority for both CEOs and CMOs is the same. It is to grow through accessing new customers. Probably not a surprise, right? That is one of the main aspects to growth. However, when you start to look at point 2 and 3 here, you start to see a bit of a divergence. CMOs tend to be more focused on driving that enhanced customer loyalty and growing share of wallet, where we see the CEOs a bit more focused on the new and innovation. So you're seeing innovation in R&D, and you're seeing growth through new products and services. So knowing that some of these functions sit outside of marketing, or they sit in other areas that might require some collaboration across the boardroom, definitely would love to hear from our panelists around thoughts on if these are similar priorities that you see in your organizations or how they might be different.
So Nick, I'm going to come to you next on this, and if I can just ask you to unmute. My question to you is, what's the sort of setup inside Vans? Is there more alignment between what's going on at sort of general management CEO level and the marketing function, or do you see some similarities in the tables that you see in front of you?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think the situation with us is that we put a high value on really empowering our teams to get after what they need to do. And that means that they have to operate with that common set of goals. So we equally spend a lot of time making sure that we're communicating what is important to us, especially as what we found, any of our playbooks that we had, right? Any of our best-in-class approaches that we had, we couldn't reference them anymore as we went through the pandemic. Whatever playbook we had, really, we had to sort of throw out the window and rewrite them pretty much on a weekly basis. And, you know, for us as an industry, some of these plans are working 18 months out, you know? So what we found is that for the most part, I think if the culture, if your purpose, if that's healthy, if that's understood, that's really a big plus, because you can really focus on the things that are important to the business. And I think, Rhonda, you mentioned clarity, but what we saw was also a priority, like really giving a set of what the priorities are for the business, so that you can really think about how you're going to solve and how you can solve for really what you can control. And I think that's true for the entire marketing function. You know, part of that is also the ability to say no, to say, that isn't part of what we agreed on, or it's not yet part of what we agreed on. Maybe that comes at a different time and is being solved at a different time horizon. So I think this sort of idea that goals are not strategy, is apt here. Strategy for us has always meant the intelligent allocation of limited resources. So, if you're in a situation where there's a lot of chaos, that lack of clarity and no support for prioritization, how do you expect the strategy to play out, right? It just won't. So for us, it's really been about control what we can, sort of put aside what we can't, or be very clear about what we can't control, or what we may need to be able to control that, to live up to the expectations, and obviously communicate on that. Because I think for us as marketing, and honestly, that's true in personal life, I think you've got to set some boundaries. You got to make really clear what you can and can't do. You got to align to that. And I think if you drive that focus, you'll yield the clear goals. And honestly, people will be excited. They'll get more excited. They'll get rewarded, and that opens you up really to sort of solving the next set of problems that might come at you. So I don't think that doesn't mean you can't be disruptive and you shouldn't be trying new things. Absolutely, but I do think you got to bring realities to the table, especially cross-functionally. You have to make sure that you educate, whether it's your legal team or your financial team. You really got to make sure that you're closer, I think, than ever before, and not just going to sort of your usual, cohorts of groups that maybe you would have worked with in the past.
Of course. I think that's a really good final point. I'm going to come to you on this as well, Muriel. I think on the on that sort of making sure that cross-functionally you're aligned, let's talk specifically about that alignment with the chief executive and the chief executive's office. How important is it to stay close to the needs of that chief executive? Because I think what we're seeing in this is that focus on the longer term from a chief exec point of view, and the focus on the sort of short term and medium term from a CMO point of view. But sometimes, at least from our perspective and from the CMOs we speak to ourselves, that's often driven by sort of mixed messages coming down from the chief exec. Focus on delivering next month's numbers, please. But also, think about what's going to happen in 3 to 5 years. What's your take on that, Muriel?
The way I frame this with our CEO and with every function across the organization is actually in terms of consumer and customers. So this is less about what does the chief executive want, and it's more about what is it going to take for us to win more customers more often and more from our competitors. So when I saw this report, I was kind of reflecting on this and thinking some of these are outcome based. So driving enhanced customer loyalty is an outcome. And some of them are activity-based. Innovation and R&D is an activity that you might choose to do to enhance customer loyalty, or to win over more new customers, or to grow a share of wallet. So for me, I always tend to think externally first. What are our customers wanting? What are their needs? What are their wants? How do we meet them? How are our competitors meeting the needs of those customers? And that should really be the framework for the discussion, both for the short term and the long term, in terms of any discussions internally with any functions, including obviously the CEO. That's
a super answer. Thank you, Muriel. Rhonda, I'm going to come back to you.
Yes, thank you, Muriel, for that. And interestingly, we did have an ask attribute in there about customers, and it fell much further down on the list, quite surprising, but I won't tease too much more of the data in the report. So the next one that we talked about very much on the heels of this is what's keeping you up at night. So we asked them, of everything that's going on in the world, what is keeping you most up at night? And our CEOs and CMOs certainly had different responses here again. So what you can see from the CEOs is they're very much thinking top of mind about data infrastructure. I think data is still a nut we have yet to crack. Everyone has made so much progress in the last couple of years, but when all of our algorithms got messed up and all of the things that we knew about our customers changed overnight, having that data infrastructure is really important. Sorry, Geraint, if you just don't mind to go back quickly. So we had that from our CEOs. They're very much thinking about the data piece. The second thing they're looking at is how to invest across that complex media mix. We know that the media landscape is changing quite rapidly. And so how do we make sure we know how to invest? And then the third one of all the things keeping them up at night is actually building that marketing team with the right skill set. So that's quite important when we think about what's keeping the CEO up at night. From the CMO standpoint, they are very much focused on that short term. So proving the ROI. And I think all of the CMOs can really relate to this, not only on the panel, but on the call, is that very instantaneous. I need to see how this is proving back for us. But then that is paired with some of those larger term things, like I need to still figure out how we balance that complex media landscape. And, oh, by the way, there's these new technologies coming into play. How do I bake that into our marketing growth plans when I'm so specifically focused on proving the ROI in the short term? So definitely want to hear from our panelists about kind of the balance between that short term versus long term focus.
So I'm going to come to you again, Nick, on that. Actually, this idea of short-term and long-term focus. How do you kind of, in a culture like Vans, which has to be, I guess, quite reactive to what is happening in pop culture, in what's going on a day-to-day in the media? How do you make sure that you have the time to go and look long-term whilst also being flexible and adaptable enough to go short-term?
Yeah, I think this is where the sort of art and science of, you know, the marketing function definitely comes in. I think what I would say is there's a real danger. I call them these sugar hits, right? There's a real danger that you're getting sort of addicted to these short-term wins. And it's not new that we have to have sort of a constant need to see quick wins. And like you just pointed out, move with culture and respond to culture. But if you're getting addicted to these, you know, sugar hits, and before you know it, it sort of drives a reliance, you know, and it drives your decisions. And I think you've really got to remember that what your overall approach for your diet is, right? It's just like yourself. If you're like me, you like to have those sugar hits, but you really have to think about what the balance is. And I think for us, agility has really been the buzzword, right? And I don't know about all of you and everyone here on the call, but sort of this idea that, well, marketing has to be agile. So what are you going to do? You know, we sort of took the approach that we're on an ongoing basis are going to recalibrate on what is going to happen, but staying focused on the things that we really believe in. So we're constantly reading and reacting. And we're doing that in the channels where that comes more natural to us, right? To be part of a conversation on social media, that's what you have to do. But to change your entire strategy around your purpose or how that comes to life is another thing. So for us, the way that that's come to life is we have a day called Checkabout Day. It's very much about celebrating creativity because that's who we are as a brand. We actually pivoted to that within 3 months to supporting mental health, because we actually saw that our consumer and our internal brand really needed a moment to come and celebrate creativity with the backdrop, and the understanding on mental health is so important. So you can still pivot, you know, you can still make those sort of quick moves. But again, I think you've got to always have in mind what your long-term focus is, and make sure you're staying authentically connected. At least for us, that's a big part. Is it authentic to us as a brand? And can we make sure that we are as a brand, getting the credit for it?
I think it's lovely, that point about being authentically connected. I mean, Pete, you must have faced some significant pressure in the last year around kind of, you know, we've got a new strategy to launch, we've got a new positioning to launch, we're going to have a new ad campaign to go with it. But in the meantime, we've got a COVID crisis, which apparently needs some sort of rapid response. How did you balance that up? I mean, how hard was it to make sure that you kind of kept the focus on delivering that fantastic new set of assets and campaign and positioning out to the market, whilst also dealing with something that was keeping everybody up?
Yeah, it's been an interesting year, isn't it, all around? And I think for us, the starting point was to reorientate the marketing team completely towards the crisis. I don't think you can do it in a half-hearted way, can you? You sort of need to be all in. And so we just moved the whole team to focus on customer care and support, and that included creative messaging. And for us, it was about keeping branches open, being clear when our call centers were open, also launching new things like a digital chat facility online that we hadn't had before, that we launched in a couple of weeks, and doing a heck of a lot of listening. And I think that's been touched on a bit by some of the other speakers, but listening to customers more than ever, getting the mood right was so key through that period, keeping sensitive to the mood of the nation and where we could most help people, particularly when their financial situation was quite challenged. So we actually launched a campaign we never intended to launch. Again, this isn't original, but we filmed ads in people's homes using colleagues from TSB with high quality camera equipment. And actually we made ads around the themes that customers were asking us about. So around fraud awareness, fraud protection, repayment holidays if they're in difficulty financially, and just different ways to contact us, which were all the things people were asking us on social, but actually we turned it into creative execution for the campaigns we were working on. And the main brand relaunch, we kept retesting behind the scenes. And this is, I think, it's been touched on in this report, is this sort of dual kind of mechanics of managing the day-to-day, but always having one eye on the future. And that for me is the exciting bit of the CMO role, is all about what you're doing in the day-to-day, but actually always keeping an eye on the future. And it's not about kind of maybe one day we'll have flying cars. It's about the kind of what's on that immediate horizon of things we should be looking at. So what we did is got all that work going, addressed everything we need to do through COVID, but kept in the background retesting and reviewing the campaign assets in creative we were going to launch with, and retesting and changing some of the scripts, making sure it was appropriate. So we reached a point where originally we were going to film our new campaign in May last year. We actually filmed it in October and launched it on Boxing Day, when originally we were going to launch it around June time. But the important, I think, link between all that work was about listening. So making sure the activity was right for the moments we were in. And what we see now is that whilst, you know, it was right to do ads filmed in people's homes in March, April, May last year, the expectation is not that brands do that now. And a lot of the messaging back in that period was around, these are difficult times, we're here to help. We see in all of our sentiment tracking that as a nation in the UK, broadly people's attitudes have moved beyond that. They're feeling a bit more optimistic with the onset of vaccines, are looking more to the future. So you have to be aware of how people feel, but clearly that people aren't in the same position they were in last March, which gave us confidence to relaunch the brand on Boxing Day with a new campaign we launched with David Schwimmer. So it's been very much about that dual tracking. And I think it fits with the what's keeping you up at night here is how do you manage the day-to-day? Well, you've got to do that. Plus also, you've got to keep that eye on the future. And the data bit, I really recognize in the report, that's been a massive thing for us. Again, whilst we've been dealing with COVID and the customer response, I've been building a business case for investing more in data. You know, we've announced we're investing in TSB and a full Adobe Experience platform, first bank in Europe to do that. And actually that came out of work we were doing already, but that got accelerated through COVID, the realization that connecting with customers using data more as a bank to better connect was more important now than ever. So COVID almost gave that more of an undercurrent, more of a momentum than it had before. But as CMO, you've got to do both, juggle the day-to-day, and absolutely aim for the future as well.
I think that's Oh, go on, Muriel, after you.
I know you haven't asked me the question, but I just wanted to build on what Pete just said. So my way of looking at it is, it's not a choice between short term and long term. There is no long term unless you win in the short term. So my analogy for that is, if you don't put fuel in your car, you cannot drive to your destination, your ultimate destination. So for me, winning in the short term allows winning in the long term. It's one and the same thing. It's a continuum. And therefore, very often people tend to think of, you know, short term versus long term, as though you have to make a choice between the two. But I don't see it that way. I really just see that as it's part of the same continuum. You have to win in the short term in order to get to the long term. It's just a step on the journey, if you want. And I think for that reason, that's a language that CEOs understand really well, and CFOs. You win in the short term to safeguard the sustainable growth of the business in the longer term. And that is a language that everybody in the company can understand.
I totally agree. I think the idea about having sort of sustainable growth as a direct result of winning the important battles in the short term is absolutely right. But I think it's that brilliant point that Pete made as well, which is that ability to, if you win your home games, to use a sporting analogy, if you win your home games, it not only gives you the ability to go on and think about that longer term stuff, but it gives you the trust to be a leading light in thinking about those longer term issues. Rhonda, I'm going to come back to you so we can move on to the next part, because I think this talks quite nicely to what we're about to talk about around addressing particular gaps.
Yep, exactly, Geraint. And those are fantastic points and a nice segue here. So what you'll see on this chart, and I know there's a bit to read here, and again, more in the full study, but there's 2 points that I'd really like to draw out and definitely highlight with the panelists. So you'll see the yellow line represents what are the skill gaps in the marketing team today. The white line represents that from the CMO's perspective. The first 2 things that you'll see from the CEO's perspective is data management and creativity. And this is quite an interesting piece based on exactly what both Muriel and Pete just spoke to, is that data really fuels the insight and understanding of what's working and what's not. And that feels like a bit of a gap today to really have that kind of ear to the ground and what's going on from their perspective. However, when you start to look at the line, which is the white line of CMOs, you start to see that it's all over the board. And this really speaks to one of the important insights that we discovered within the report, which is that CMOs are just tasked with so many skills that they need to be performing and staying aware of and having teams to support. And it goes back to that agility that everyone's mentioned about how do we make sure that we are surrounding those opportunities in the moment where they exist, but then not compromising that focus on where our ultimate strategy is taking us. And I think the other important note to make here is that it's not, very much to your point, Muriel, about short-term versus long-term. It is not about data versus creativity. In this world, we have to have harmony between both, because better data management and insight from our customers leads to better creativity and vice versa. So we definitely want to talk to, are you facing some of these same challenges with trying to decide what is the right marketing team and skill set to have within your teams? And how has that changed and adapt over the last year? And what do you expect in the future?
Yeah, Muriel, I'll come to you on exactly that point. I mean, how frequently should a leader in the marketing function be looking at the skill set of their own team and going, actually, I need to review this and make sure that we're ahead of the game?
So I think I have 2 answers to that. One is the skills that you need in your marketing team are directly a function of your objectives. What are we trying to achieve? And that needs to ladder up to the company's objective, both the short term and the longer term. So, because otherwise, how can you prioritize what's going to be more important? And therefore, you need to be reviewing this on an agile basis. Now, of course, you cannot do and you should not do a marketing reorganization and a complete review of skill sets every day or every week. But I think once a year, as you kind of, start thinking about, is the strategy still the relevant strategy, especially in a very fluid and uncertain environment, you probably need to review this more often than you would do in 10 years ago, when things were maybe at least perceived to be a little bit more stable. So I think there's 2 sides to this. One is a little bit like, I go back to my car analogy. When you drive a car, you're constantly adapting, shifting your wheel left and right, accelerating, decelerating, checking your mirrors. You should be doing that on a constant basis. And then every now and then you look at your map and you say, am I still on the right road? Am I still going in the right direction? Am I still going at the right speed? And you have to find a balance between the 2. Also, because you don't want to destabilize more than you want to address the gaps. So I think it's quite a mixture of data and science that supports that. We've just gone through a pretty deep analysis of our capabilities and are we set up for the future, not in terms of organizational structure, but in terms of capabilities. Do we have the skill set in the organization, in the marketing organization, to sustain us over the next few years? And what do we want to do about that? Do we do that through on-the-job training? Do we do that through formal training? Do we do that through recruitment? Do we do that through org structure? Do we do that with partnership with agencies? So we've just gone through a pretty significant review of our capabilities. And then there's a day-to-day, tweaking, tinkering, refining, enhancing to make sure that you're constantly optimizing and being as efficient as possible. Back to the point on capacity, you want to be efficient.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting situation that you kind of play out there, because I think there's always that balance to be struck between, you know, change for change's sake and sort of upsetting the apple cart a bit in a team that might be really well structured and actually really gelling quite nicely culturally, but also by also being very, very brutal about where the skills gaps might lie and how rightly you should be either, you know, upskilling or training existing team members if you have a fantastic culture in place. I think the other part of this question, I'm going to come to you, Pete, on this part is, you know, if you are in a situation where ultimately your marketing team, I know we've got people on the line from smaller businesses actually who've built their marketing team on almost like an ad hoc basis as the need has arisen over the years to add skill, or actually as budget has become available to add more skill or more support or more resource, they've brought in either generalists or people with a specific group of skills, and then that person has stayed with the business as the business has grown up. Do you have any advice to people in those sorts of roles, Pete, who have a sense that perhaps the team that they've built over a significant period of time needs a look at, and how they go through that process?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, it's about the earlier point in this presentation about strategy. So it's having a really good look at the strategy and going, right, for this strategy to succeed and be delivered, have we got the right skill set to make that happen? And also, are there gaps there? And I think building on one of Muriel's points, I think that also extends to the agency partners you work with. So I think within the ecosystem of how you get marketing done in your organization, in combination, have you got what you need? And that then I think requires you to step back and go, well, actually, are we working with the right agency partners? Do we need a different creative partner or a new data partner, or to work with a different media agency partner, for example? And then have we got the right skill sets for marketing to build into the future as well? So I'd start with the strategy, step back, have a look at it. And I think then, look, what more do you need to bring in? I think there's a danger with this stuff that also can become a bit knee-jerk. So my encouragement would be, for example, if you've got gaps in data analytics, well, could you outsource that? Can you work with a small or different or local agency or someone to help you with that in the short term, rather than jump immediately to that? So the important bit, taking Muriel's car example of, you know, where's the destination we're trying to get to? Well, you know, what do you need to reach that destination? And I think it's a combination of those different resources. And I do think, yes, start with the end in mind. So, for example, if you see in your strategy that your focus needs to be far more on deepening the relationships you've got with your customers, therefore it's about more data analytics, greater use of digital and first-party data. Well, if you know that's the destination point, what do you need? Well, probably means you need to work with a more sophisticated data agency. Might mean you need more analysts in the team. Maybe you need less kind of campaign managers. Great. So build towards that. And that could be, as I say, a combination of great agencies to work with and mixing and moving around, upskilling, changing some of the skills in the team. But again, build a plan to get there. Start, be very, very focused, very objective on where you want to get to and why, and what the building blocks are to get there. So it doesn't become sort of this knee-jerk kind of hokey-cokey thing of kind of, well, I'll do a bit of this and a bit of that. No, otherwise you end up with a bit of a Frankenstein. It's absolutely about going for it with the end in mind.
Thank you, Pete. I'm going to just go through the next slide. I'm just going to highlight something that we're going to talk to in a report later in the year, where we're going to dive into this stat in a bit more detail. I think this will hopefully be a bit of a surprise to the people on the call. One of the pieces of data we found is that less than 20% of the non-C-suite marketers we talked to in the study are actually pursuing the CMO role in their direct future. And rather than go into this in detail now, because I'm conscious of our time, I'm just going to set up the fact that we're going to go into this in a lot more detail later in the year, because we think that there is a little bit of a concern here around, is this a talent crisis, or is this just that there is a disintermediation of the role and that people see individual roles within the C-suite as being a different path for them? So we're not going to touch on this too much, but we're now going to go on to the good news, because there is a lot of good news in the report, and not least this lovely statistic, which is that 89% of all CMOs in the report claim to have a lot of control and input in shaping their business objectives. And actually, that is backed up by the CEOs in the report saying that marketing is now the second most influential role in the boardroom, just after finance. I'm going to come to you on this, Nick. Does that ring true? Do you feel like you're in the second most influential role after finance in the business? And has that got more so since the most recent crises of 2020 hit?
I don't know about the ranking, right? We're all equal, but I would say there's definitely more of a realization, I think, of the business overall that marketing drives revenue. And over the years, we shared those reports, and maybe they've sort of been acknowledged, but I don't think they've ever really sort of been maybe understood. Maybe they've been taken a little bit more for granted. Let's say it like that. So I think in a place where we've been, where maybe some of the business tools that you used to have are just not available, right? Overnight, they're shut off. All of a sudden, marketing or demand creation really becomes a tool you want to make sure is as sharp as it can be, because whatever you're driving, whatever revenue you're driving via marketing, it's a significant amount for us. You just cannot afford for it not to work, right? So I think what has happened through COVID is actually really created a real close-knit partnership between finance and marketing, and even to the point where our CFOs are reaching around the table saying, teach me how to speak marketing. Tell me more about the campaigns you're driving, because actually I have to explain it more in front of the board, right? Or our CEOs. So I think the seat at the table is firmly there. It's for us to sort of take it, and as marketing is going through a transformation, it's really to show what perhaps has been taken a little bit for granted and maybe was not so much at the forefront, taking that, putting it firmly into the focus, and just making sure that understanding is there. And honestly, the same is true of the consumer engagement metrics. What are we aligning to measure? What is the action that comes out of it look like? Let's not just do the report for report's sake, but let's make sure that when we're showing you results or when we're making recommendations, we're also getting the business support to go and actually make them come to life.
Pete, let's come to you on this as well. I mean, does this ring true? I mean, you've done a number of different roles in different businesses, and I imagine there have been some businesses in which you felt that actually, yes, I do feel like I'm in a really influential role around the table, but in other businesses, not so much. Do you think that's changed in the last 5 years, last 10 years? Has it gone up and down?
Yeah, I think it's gone up and down a bit. I think it does depend a lot on the CMO and how you engage with the exec, though. I don't think you can arrive in an organization and go, well, here's how marketing plays out. I think you've got to create that yourself. And so if I look at, I joined the post office about 5-6 years ago. I was there for a few years running marketing. And actually, one of my big observations coming in is marketing had clearly been assigned to you being, and people jokingly saying, oh, marketing's the coloring in team. So you do sort of like campaigns and stuff. Now, if you stay stuck there in a business, you don't have permission to do some of the stuff on this slide. You've got to, as a CMO, engage on a wide variety of topics outside of creative. And I think where I've seen this fail is if marketing ends up sort of pigeonholed as, and Muriel will remember this from our B2B days in insurance, where marketing ended up being the guys that organise the golf day or the trip to the horse racing for the brokers. If you end up there, you're in real trouble. Actually, what's the strategic value you can drive? So marketing and CMO should be bringing the voice of the customer. What do customers think, want, need? Where's the competition? What's your point of difference? What's your positioning? What's the purpose of your brand? Bring strategy, bring thinking to the table that makes you indispensable. If not, you will be relegated to the colouring in team in the corner of the room. So you only become influential in the boardroom by actively pursuing that and adding value. Outside of things people would naturally expect you. So if I look at my role within TSB, there's a model I like that Interbrand use about 4 areas of ensuring you deliver your purpose. The first of which is communications, the second which is products and services, the third is people and culture, and the fourth is environment and channels, which for us is the website, our app, and bank branches. My team are involved in all 4 of those boxes. We help shape the culture of the organization, the products we deliver, the products that go to market, proposition development, what the branches will look like in the future, what the branches look like now, the look and feel of our website, our sales journeys. Marketing is involved in all 4 of those, obviously including communication, which makes us as influential as you say here. If we just stayed stuck in the comms box, we would not be doing it on this slide. So I think you need strong marketing leaders to help enable this. And my experience has been where I've walked into a business where that hasn't been the case, marketing has allowed itself to be relegated as the kind of poor cousin of other departments. So my encouragement would be, don't let yourself get there. If you find yourself there, fight your way back. Be influential, bring those things to the table, at the board, at exec level, and change the conversation.
Yeah, it's a really good way of kind of wrapping that section up, of saying, look, actually, this is about, it's all on us. It's on marketers to take ownership of this strategic conversation, because I think what's really interesting is you notice the more that you speak to marketers these days, the types of languages they speak. They speak finance, they speak data, they speak technology, they speak sales, they speak brand experience and product experience, they speak R&D. They're one of the few functions in the business that are able to turn their hand to and understand the language of all of the other functions at the same time. You know, we talk in the report about marketing potentially becoming a proper force multiplier in the business. So there's a really interesting element here where if you recognize the skill set that marketing has built for itself, great marketers have built for themselves, then actually you're in a place where you have enormous influence to make real change happen. Really meaningful change happen. Rhonda, I'm going to come back to you to just run us through to the end.
Yes, great. Thank you, Geraint. And Pete, that was a lovely call to action. Nick emphasized, if you aren't invited to the party, invite yourself. And that's so important. And this next slide, we did ask in the study, what is your perception? And so you'll see the CEOs and CMOs agree between creative department and strategic growth driver. And so I think that's really important that we see CEOs signaling that they do want marketing to have a seat at the table, not just to be the coloring in department, but to actually really drive a lot of that strategic growth that we know that the business can achieve. The one other interesting thing to point out here, and I know we'll kind of move quickly in the interest of time, is that CEOs are still saying, I need my marketing department to represent the voice of our customers and make sure that we're hearing that and we're using that platform to see it. Interestingly, CMO said, what's the perception of marketing? And voice of the customer did not come up in the top 5. So you see a lot more around brand activation, brand stewards, and creative, but that voice of the customer is falling off. We dig into that a lot more in the report. We are seeing that disaggregation of the CMO role, where you're seeing chief customer officers and those kinds of roles popping up in organizations. So we don't have enough time, unfortunately, to cover that in great detail. But I think, Pete, you so nicely and eloquently stated, we really have to make sure that if you are a CMO and you're not in that strategic growth discussion, and you're not having that seat at the table, you've got to fight your way in, because it's so important, and CEOs do see the value in that discussion. All right, so then getting into the last bit here. So we promised that this is not just going to be insights, but actually tools and outcomes of which you can use to really help navigate this chaos. So now that we've understood some of those things that undermine chaos, how do you actually harness the chaos for growth? We're going to take you through 3 models that we've developed off the back of this white paper to really help you navigate that chaos. So the first one, I'll run through all 3, and then we'll have some commentary from our panelists. The first one is what we call our forces model. And you'll see that this is split between external forces and internal forces of chaos. And we have talked so much in this discussion about making sure there is that clarity on strategy. And in order to have that clarity on strategy, we have to have that balance of both the internal and the external perspective. So if I start on the left side, the external perspective, there are a lot of shaping forces. We all know those big macro trends, those types of things that are happening around us. There's also a lot that is then either distilling down or happening separately at the category level. So of the business that I'm in and the competitive set that I live in from a customer perspective, what are those forces that are really shaping my category? And then finally, what are the experience forces? Those are those day-to-day kind of micro moments that are happening across the customer experience landscape. All of a sudden, everyone's making a TikTok video. That was not a shaping force several years ago, but it became an experience force that has bubbled up to be quite significant. On the right side, we see from an internal standpoint, strategy first and foremost. When we don't have clarity on the strategy, where we're going, to use Muriel's analogy, if we don't know where our destination is, it's very difficult to make sure that we're charting the right course to get there. So that is the first and foremost driver of chaos, is not having a clear strategy. From there, very not surprisingly, it is the capability and the skills on the team to actually deliver that strategy. And finally, where the rubber really meets the road is in the middle of experience delivery. And the reason these are coming together is because we want to make sure that we're meeting our consumers and customers at the moment. We have the right experience for them at the right moment that they need it. If anything, COVID has taught us that consumer behavior can change overnight, and we have to make sure that we're in a position to be agile and adaptive to meet them at that moment. So that's the forces model. And then what we've done with the forces model is to actually take it into prioritization, a word that Nick used earlier. And this model is really to help you define the shape of the chaos that lives in your world specifically. So this should look different for every business and brand. To quickly talk through the two axes that we have here, we've said on countless times throughout this call how important that time horizon is. If you aren't capitalizing on something that's happening at the moment that it's occurring, it's often too late to actually do something about it. Additionally, there are things that are further out on that time horizon, as Muriel said, the short term versus the long term, that we don't even know necessarily how it might impact our business, but doesn't mean that we should ignore it. It should absolutely be in our purview. So you'll see there on the x-axis, we have time, and it's always moving, just like change, always changing. On the y-axis, what you'll see is our ability to influence. And this is a specific firm's ability to influence this. And judging your ability to influence this will come into play things like, what are our growth ambitions? Is our culture, is our teams, our capabilities and partners able to deliver against this? And so what we do is take all of those shaping forces that we saw in the forces model, and we start to plot them out and say, okay, what are those things that are closer in time-wise that we can absolutely win on and we have the ability to influence? Those are our quick wins. Those things that are core to our strategy really sit in the middle. They're a bit farther out, but we know we need to move on them to really get us to where we're going from an ambition standpoint. And then finally, on the far right, you're going to see those transformative bets. We call those bets because it's very much a scenario planning exercise. We know there are big trends coming down the path that we need to plan for. We don't know when they'll necessarily emerge. They may be accelerated, they may take longer, and we also don't know to what degree we can have the ability to influence them. But it, again, doesn't mean they shouldn't be on our purview. So we'll really use that to define the shape of the chaos. And then the final model, probably the most important, is having our absolute clarity on that growth framework. And again, our panelists have summed this up so nicely. First and foremost, top of this framework is, what is our growth ambition? What are we trying to achieve as an organization? What's that destination? What is the outcome that we're really looking for? That should then help us filter down and use our own analysis of those different drivers of chaos to understand what are those quick wins that we can move quickly on, what are those strategic moves, and finally those transformative bets. And from there, you'll see the enablers that really sit beneath any of those moves. So engagement, and Pete, Nick, Muriel, you all spoke about communication, transparent communication, making sure that everybody solely understands exactly not only what is the strategy, but how do they individually deliver against that. The second one is to mobilize, really making sure that we've actually structured the organization in a way that allows that strategy to be executed and delivered. The third one is about operationalizing, and this is where we start to think about our data, our partners, the full value chain. Are we really set up to actually deliver this? And then the final point, most importantly, is around being adaptable and making sure that we do have an ear to the ground. We have that constant fluent feedback loop of data where we can make those agile moves as they emerge. There's a lot more details and some examples in the full report, but in the last 2 minutes, would love to have any commentary from our panelists on the growth models.
Pete, I'm gonna come to you if you don't mind. What's you've seen the model, you've had a bit of a play with the report as one of our panelists. What's your kind of one key takeaway from this that you want to give back to the audience?
No, I look at it and I think it's a super smart model. So much of the insight I agree with. I think for me it just underpins the importance of marketing as a force for growth. But it's about being very deliberate as marketers in the role we can play within the organisation and being more influential would be my takeaway.
And you, Muriel?
I would build on what Pete said, and I think for me it really comes down to storytelling and story doing. The models are just a framework. What really matters at the end of the day is collating everybody's inputs and then ensuring everybody's very engaged, lives and breathes, and almost kind of makes it their mission, makes it their purpose to deliver against those objectives. So storytelling and story doing, because telling is not enough. You then got to, walk the walk and not just talk the talk, the famous kind of ones. But storytelling and story doing are really critical.
And to you finally, Nick.
The model you put forward is incredibly practical. I started to organize my thoughts almost in that way. I would say, don't wait for those transformative bets. Often some of the small ideas become the big transformative ideas. That's what we've seen. Something that might start in China might become the big thing in the US. So don't go through it in sequence. Like I would say, place some bets, think about what transformation means. Perhaps start it small so it can live bigger further down the line.
Thank you. I mean, it's been a fascinating discussion. I mean, we've had some lovely comments actually through, and thank you to everyone who's both asked questions and sent through lovely comments. It's been a really interesting chat. I just want to say thank you to a fabulous panel. Thank you, Muriel. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Nick. And also thank you, Rhonda, for taking us through the top line of the report. As we mentioned at the beginning, if you missed it at the beginning, the full report will be live on Monday. You will get, as an attender, you'll get a copy in your inbox at first thing Monday morning. And of course, if you have any questions on the report at all, in that report, you'll find contact details for the good people of Clare. Later on this year, you'll also see more information coming out in terms of the forces that we uncovered in the data. We'll be doing those in sector-specific reports. I think the first one we're going to launch is going to be around financial services in March. So look out for an event towards the end of March, in week commencing to the 22nd of March. And we'll also be doing one-on-one interviews with some of the leading lights of marketing around the world, starting with Mark Evans from Direct Line, the Managing Director of Marketing and Digital. And we're going to be talking to him specifically about the talent challenge on, I think, the 26th of February. And that's it from us. Please do make sure you follow us at Clare M&C Saatchi on LinkedIn and take a look at the website, clarestrategy.com. And thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your evening and afternoon, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.